Hi, I'm James Gurney and welcome to my channel. I've got here a yellow lemon, a red teapot, and a blue check placemat. I want to paint those outdoors in the natural sunlight, but I only want to use 3 colors. Is it possible? We'll find out, and I'll give you a hint. It doesn't go as planned. Now I'm setting up this still life in the direct sunlight because the light and shadow and the colors are much clearer in sunlight. Got a orange, a lemon, a red teapot, and a blue and white placemat. Now I'm drawing here in a watercolor sketchbook using a graphite pencil. And I want to get the drawing fairly accurate, so I'm going to take my time on this. First drawing the center lines, shape of the teapot, the orange and the lemon. What I do is rough it in first fairly loosely, and then I start doing measurements to check it against the scene that I'm looking at. If I need to move something, I can redraw it. This is sped up a little bit so that it doesn't take all day. Now what colors should I use for this? I'll use white, cadmium yellow light, quinacridone violet, and phthalo blue. The reason I'm choosing these colors is they resemble the colors used by printers to print any colors under the sun. Now I'm using a piece of damp paper towel to squeeze them out on, but this idea of the yellow, red, magenta, blue, violet, cyan, green, these colors are equal around the wheel. And this idea is not mine. This goes back to 1908, a book by James Hatt, which introduced magenta and cyan as colors to use as primaries in printing. Let's see if it works for this painting. Now I've got a challenge right away because in order to get either an orange color or a reddish color, I have to mix the quinacridone violet with yellow. So I'm doing that. A little bit of quinacridone violet and yellow will make a passable orange. I'm leaving a few little dots of white for the highlights. At this stage I'm using a pretty big flat synthetic brush, about 3/4 inch. And I'm keeping everything transparent. I'm not touching the white just yet. So this is still going to be watercolor, transparent watercolor. You may notice that I often use gouache and watercolor pigments somewhat interchangeably and without noticing or caring much about whether I'm using watercolor or gouache. Some companies actually manufacture their paints to be kind of a hybrid between watercolor and gouache. Shinhan Pass, for example, makes a line of hybrid watercolor and gouache. And I asked the folks at Holbein about what is the difference between watercolor and gouache, and they said, and I quote, "The principal difference between artist watercolor and designer's gouache is that watercolor contains less pigment and more gum arabic, and gouache contains more pigment and less gum arabic. We at Holbein are not adding any whitening agent to gouache, but we specifically chose gouache pigments that are naturally matte finished in the way they dry." There's another reason I'm not adding white to the mixtures here is that white will do 3 different things to a color when you mix it in. It'll cool the color typically, especially with warm colors like orange. It'll also flatten the color out. Sometimes that's desirable if you're painting a sky. And it'll also often weaken a color and darken a color of all things. If you keep it transparent, you often get a lighter, brighter, warmer, more textural color. So that's why I'm leaving aside the white and trying to see if I can just paint area by area and see if I can get the main areas of this scene laid in transparent pigment. Now there's the red, which is also painted with a combination of quinacridone violet and cadmium yellow light. The shadow's fairly dark. And within that shadow, underneath the rim at the top, you can just see some reflections of the orange and the lemon on the underside of the area that sticks out. So I'm going to suggest that. I'll separate the lid from the teapot along this thin line at the edge of the lid. Now with big shapes, I'll paint the shadow side of the teapot, which is picking up some reflections from the tablecloth. The shadow on the tablecloth is fairly dark. I'll start by painting the cool bluish color of the cast shadow. So this is the white in shadow. I'm ignoring the blue color itself will be a much darker blue color within that shadow. This is just the white part of the placemat in shadow. While I have it on my brush, I'm painting it all in. Dries fast because it's a fairly dry summer day. Now I can start painting the pattern on this woven picnic pattern. Using the tip of a round synthetic brush to quickly indicate where these stripes go. And now I can splay it out to kind of get that textural effect of the woven texture with the light shining almost tangent to it, so it picks up bits of highlights. Wetting it will unify those strokes if you catch it fast enough. There's a few areas that are left pure white, and most of those I want to cover up because I want to save pure white for the highlights. Now I wonder if I can lighten up the light side of the teapot a little bit. I wanted to make it look nice and red, but it almost looks too dark around that highlight. So if I dab at it with a damp piece of cloth, I can maybe lighten it a bit. This is a piece of an old t-shirt. When I get rid of old t-shirts, I turn them into paint rags, and they're really good for things like this. This is called lifting off. Now, there has to be a background behind that teapot. And it's obviously a greenish color, yellow-green where the leaves are catching light. And I'm looking at how dark the shadows are on the shadow side. On the light side of the teapot, it's kind of lighter in general than the background. So I'm thinking about the color itself, that greenish color, which I can sort of mix out of the ingredient colors that I have. Also, there are a lot of leaves in that spirea bush. So the leaves and the texture of the leaves introduce a lot of light and dark shapes behind the teapot. Should I paint them as one flat tone or try to get a sense of those leaves? I don't know yet. I'll just put down a variegated green tone, darker where it meets the teapot. Mel asks, James, what's your opinion on digital painting? Is that a medium you enjoy or not, really? Well, I've never really given it much of a trial. I don't have a tablet or anything. I love digital video. You wouldn't be watching this if I didn't love digital cameras and nonlinear editing. But I've got my hands pretty full with gouache, watercolor, casein, and oil, plus pencils and pen and ink. But I certainly admire many artists who do digital artwork, both 3D and 2D. I've just never really played with it much. I realize it's required for certain fields, but since I don't work in those fields, it doesn't really matter. And I like having originals. Okay, I'm using my flat brush here to drop in some somewhat more neutral tones in the outer edges, letting them settle in. And where that bead forms at the bottom of a large patch of wet area, I have to manage that bead. You see it in the lower right area. If I get too much moisture on a nearly vertical surface like this, it will run down across the painting. That's the other thing I like about physical paint, is especially watercolor, is you're dealing with gravity and you're dealing with drying time and all these factors of physics that are playing with your work in time. Patrick says, when I watch your water-based paintings, there's often this moment of, oh no, how's he going to fix that? It astonishes me that skill planning and a flexible approach often looks like an airplane crash that pulls up into a perfect landing. Thanks, Patrick. I often think of Sargent's quote about watercolor painting as making the best of an emergency. For me, sometimes it does crash, but then I can always rework it and fix it, or press the delete button if I'm shooting a video. But in this case, if something doesn't work, I want to share it with you so you can see how I try to work my way out of a crash, because I think that's almost more interesting than watching a painting that goes perfectly. The thing I'm worried about right now is that the red looks kind of dull, honestly, compared to the red of the actual thing, and the orange and lemon don't look different enough to be clearly an orange and clearly a lemon. I'm fiddling around with the textures, trying to get those right. Maybe that'll save it. But I think the basic issue is going to be the relationships of and intensities of color. Now you notice I'm dipping into the white for the first time now, because I'm attracted by those highlights. I always recommend to hold off on highlights until later in the process, but I can't resist. On the teapot, the highlight is larger where the surface is curving more slowly. And on the orange, the highlight is broken up by the uneven surface of the orange itself. So you can really describe texture by where you place the highlights. I want to just drop in a layer of orange, or at least as much as I can mix this as an orange with this triadic palette. Try to make the light side a little bit more intense color. And now I'm going to have to darken the shadow a little bit more too. Now what I need to decide is, are the limitations of this triad working for me or against me? And did I choose the best three colors to start with, or should I use another set? Now the way we can find out what these colors are capable of is to do a triad test. This is a diamond-shaped pattern, but it's really just two triangles side by side. On the left, the triangle shows you the colors straight out of the tube and what they look like mixed together, and then tints of those colors mixed with white to get lighter versions of the colors. That'll give us a good idea of the range that this palette has. Now, to start with, we need a ruler, a triangle, a pencil, and a kneaded eraser and a brush, a 1/2-inch brush. The triangle I'll be using is a 30-60-90 triangle, and I'll be drawing two lines 3 inches long each at 30 degrees up from vertical, marking it 3 inches. Now, of course, this way of drawing the grid is only for people who want it to look perfect. You can also freehand it, and it works fine that way too. Vertical line between the two triangles. Mark the top ones in 3 1-inch segments, and then use the 60 part of the triangle to draw in those 60-degree slopes toward the center. And then we can draw these rectangles. And what we want to do is form a equilateral triangle in the center of the of each side. And this will be the grid we're going to follow. Now I have the phthalo blue, quinacridone violet, cadmium yellow light, and white gouache. This is the three colors in the triad that I'm using for the teapot. And we're going to find out what these look like in the maximum pure form, both in the pure form coming out of the tube and the tints. A tint is a color mixed with white. It's a 1/2 inch Richardson brush, but it could be any kind of flat synthetic brush. That was pure cadmium yellow light, now mixed with white to make a lighter version. Okay, now I have the brush has both cadmium yellow light and white in it. What can I do next? I can mix the green, the tint of the green, in this direction. Clean out the brush. It's really important to have the brush clean between any mixtures where you want to get rid of the last color. So now I have a pure tint of the phthalo blue. Clean the brush again. Yellow, blue. Now we're going to use the yellow and blue more straight out of the tube to get a darker green. Clean that out. And now we'll use the blue straight out of the tube. I'm painting it here a little bit messily, but that's okay. I can mix the quinacridone violet here, and this gives me probably the darkest color of all the colors I can mix. And then with a clean brush, I can mix this patch of pure quinacridone violet, tint it, need a little bit more white to make the light version of the quinacridone violet. And now I can mix it with the tint of quinacridone violet plus phthalo blue. And if I mix all three together in a tint, I'll get the gray or the middle color. Now clean it again. And we can make a strong dark color that's a mix of all three straight out of the tube. And then what we need to finish up with are the oranges. There's the full intensity orange and the tint of the orange, as strong as I can get it with this palette. So I won't be able to get anything brighter than this out of this gamut. And when I look back to the subject, I realize I'm going to need that bright orange or it just won't look like an orange. And that's the part that worries me most about these colors. It's the orange colors. So what if I remove these and switch them out for 3 other primaries and kind of redo the painting on top of the old one? Cadmium yellow light, same as I had before, but now a warmer red, purole red, and ultramarine blue. The purole red is similar to a cadmium red medium. So this is closer to our traditional art school primaries that we would have used out of a basic paint set. And I'll do this triad test to see how it looks with the tints of the yellow. And let's clean that brush out. And then we'll try out a green. And we can tint the green. And then we can use the ultramarine blue in its pure form. We'll tint the ultramarine. And then we'll do a violet with this palette, at least a tint of a violet first. And then red and white makes pink. Clean it up. Now that nice strong red, I like the look of that. Let's mix it with blue. Still a dark color, not quite as dark as before. If we mix all three colors together, out of the tube we'll get this dark color, pretty nice and dark, and if we lighten it up we'll get a gray. And now let's try, with a clean brush, we'll try the orange color. Nice strong orange. This will work a lot better. So what have we learned? If we want to get that bright red color of the teapot and the orange, we're going to have to use those colors. We can't use the yellow, magenta, and cyan because they're too weak on the reds. The triangle doesn't include enough bright reds. We need to shift the gamut over by choosing a red, a yellow, and a blue, and get our mixtures from those more traditional primaries. And that's the only way we can get the colors in this particular still life. So that'll be my goal here for the second half of doing this painting, is to take those three colors, this new triad, and basically repaint the whole painting, give it a second layer, and try to get something closer to what I'm looking at. Wow, look at those reds, much brighter. Mix a little yellow in and I'll get a warmer red. A little white makes it opaque. And now that previous red that I had seems kind of anemic. Even in the shadows, the red is a little stronger, or it appears that way to my eye when I look at the actual scene. You see the reflection of the orange in the teapot, just to the upper right of where the orange is. The highlight on the handle. And the highlight on the teapot itself. Now let's get a stronger orange color for the orange. Much brighter this time. I was at the limit of my saturation or chroma range before, but now I have a very strong high chroma orange that I can work with. I'm stepping it down in value from the upper left edge up here, and as it goes into the planes that approach the shadow, the halftone, the darker halftones, I let it get a little darker. Now with those full rich colors on the light side, the shadow side of the orange is going to have to be quite a bit darker, but I'll get to that in a little bit. At this point my palette is small and it's filling up with mixtures, so I got to clean it off. And whenever dealing with a subject with a lot of pure tints and pure colors, it's important to keep the palette clean and keep the brushes clean. Especially when you're mixing a new mixture that has to be pure. The good thing about this exercise of using a triad for a still life with bright colors is that it forces you to keep your mixing habits fairly disciplined for mixing unadulterated pure colors. And that'll serve you well in other painting challenges where you don't have to have such pure mixtures. Now the lights are really quite light, and I'm scumbling over. Scumbling is a word for putting white over the surface of another layer of color in a dry, scrubby kind of way. Now we can deal with the greens. Fairly watery mixture of yellow and blue, and a little bit of red to knock it down. It's not that full intensity. I gotta have something that's neutralized a little bit in here. When you're using three primary colors like this, you become aware how grays are really mixtures of all three colors. And even if it's a greenish color, it here needs to be grayed down in order to set off those brighter red colors that they're up against. Also, the spirea bush has some red in it in the tips of the leaves. It's not all just intense solid green. While the surface is wet, I can darken it here and there and let the colors melt into each other. It's okay if I paint over the edge of the teapot because I can always come back in and fix it. Now touching up the highlights. And that reflected light from the orange underneath the rim. And now since this is vignetting to the white of the sketchbook page, I can sort of go out of focus as I get toward the edge, lighten up the values, and let it melt into the white of the page. Like with any picture, I have to think about what areas are most important here, and certainly the details of the teapot and the textures of the orange are most important, and getting the big color relationships. I'm using a little bit of a white or off-white, kind of a buff, water-soluble colored pencil just to define a few lines. It's often hard to get thin lines in a painting. And instead of that relatively flat green, I'd like to get more definition in the leaves and foliage. So I've set it up again, and that gives me the chance to try a couple other ideas in the same lighting. And I especially want to capture that foliage background texture. Now I've got the same colors, the white, yellow, blue, and red. And I want to wet down the whole background so that I can work into it without it being too sharp and dry. Oh, that's okay, I can fix it. Drips like this don't matter. Just dry it while I can, dab it dry, and then I'll come back and fix whatever melted. But let's get all this wet. It'll start to melt the gouache. A lot of you who are using gouache for the first time find that it keeps reactivating. That's a nice thing if you want it to reactivate. If you don't want it to reactivate, you have to be really light with your touches, especially with a wet brush. Okay, let's speed things up a little bit. We mix a lighter green to try to get some leaf structure. And I want to just start getting the character of the leaves across. We've got some lights and some darks all wet together here. Now there's some red on the tips of the leaves. Just a few dragged strokes will perk up the reds and tie together all the colors. If that background has some red and some blue and some yellow in it, it'll tie together with all the other colors. Now let's get some lighter leaf colors. Look at those light greens and such a variety. I'm using now a round pointed synthetic brush. It's okay if I paint beyond this handle and come back, but I'm kind of painting up to the edge. But I have to work quickly. I don't want to lose the wetness of that background. I'm not copying it leaf for leaf. I'm just getting the character of the leaves because there's almost no way I could capture them exactly individually. These are the red tips of the leaves. Once you start overlapping a few different layers of strokes, things start getting more interesting. If I were to let this background dry completely, every stroke would have that dry brush look to it. I don't necessarily want that. And I'm going for a kind of randomness here. Letting my hand go almost out of control. You can see where I rubbed off the background tone underneath the layer I'm doing now. So you see the texture of the paper coming through that underpainting. Sometimes I load the brush a little bit unevenly like I did just there. So it's a little bit lighter on the left hand edge. And the stroke has a little bit darker pigment on the right hand edge. I reach around from the top to get these strokes. And that's partially so I don't block the camera. Switching to the round brush again. Okay, I'll mix up a big batch of greenish white and drop it all into the background here. And then let the remaining tone underneath it be the leaf shapes as if they're overlapping something light. That repetitive chirping sound is chipmunks, not birds. Little rodents which drive Smooth, the dog, crazy. It's probably a warning call from the chipmunks because they see Smooth in the yard somewhere. And then I can mix a deeper green and weave the leaf shapes and colors over that background. Now working with this triad is nice because I know that if I need a blue, I've got that one blue, and if I need a yellow, I got that one yellow, and the same with red. Just dabbing with the brush. I can experiment with this, and if I don't like something I'm doing, I can always just rub it off with a damp rag. Sometimes if you paint faster than your brain can think, you can get unexpected solutions that you might not have done very intentionally. I'll dampen a rag and rub off some paint. Just to soften that edge. You can almost come back to the white of the paper. Now returning to the teapot, the area around the highlight is actually reflecting the blue of the sky. I just noticed that because I saw the orange reflections of the oranges below, but above, it's almost violet colored around that highlight where we're reflecting the blue of the sky. So I'm going to take some Purell red with some water and some white. This gives me kind of a pink. And with a little blue in that pink, I can kind of drop it in there. And then look at these oranges. The texture of those highlights is wonderful. So I can get some of that in with just a little small brush, touching the tip of it to get that texture, picking up the reflection on the waxy undersurface, and then top of the orange. The reflection. With that woven placemat, I almost have to choose between putting the detail in the light or the shadow. The light is almost burned out in the photo. Very pale in the light. I'm using the new blue, the ultramarine blue, instead of the phthalo to get that more bright blue-violet color. And now I can fix those areas in the handle where I had painted over the edge. This is really easy to do, and why you don't need to worry about painting over a line with a background tone. When I finish these dark red strokes, I want to go back to the highlight, make it a little sharper, but that means cleaning out my brush. And with a clean brush, I can mix a little bit of red in with the white. every highlight contains not only a bright white light source, but also a little bit of the color of its local color underneath. And in this case, it would be a little bit of yellow. Now I'm defining these edges between the teapot and the background. But a good general rule is in the later stage of a painting, you want some of your touches to add detail or add sharpness and definition, but you also want some of your touches to simplify, soften, or eliminate detail if it's not necessary. And that's what I'm going to do now. I want to just get a dark tone, kind of group this all together down here, and let it weave together by reactivating that gouache. I want to lose that edge. So here's some dark blue and red. Here's the final. And what I learned from doing this painting is that if you want to paint bright colored objects with just 3 colors, you have to choose your primary colors carefully, keep your palette mixtures clean, and keep your brushes clean as you go. But that's not the end of the story of painting with triads or 3-color schemes. You can also use bright colors to start with and paint grayed down scenes like these rooftops in Laguna or this farmyard scene in New York State. Also, you don't have to use red, yellow, and blue. You can use green, violet, and yellow like this house in New York State, or even orange, green, and violet, which are traditionally thought of as secondary colors for this scene along the Hudson River. So that's what this new tutorial is about, called triads. And you've seen a sample from it, but there's a lot more. There's demos in the field. All these paintings I show you kind of start to finish, how I mix the colors and how I arrive at the final paintings. But also I take you in the studio to do some experiments like the triad test, a way of testing out both the tube colors and the tints that you get for any 3-color combination. We also go into how to paint grays. There's various ways to do it. In fact, there are 8 different ways I walk you through, and you can do them yourself, and you really learn a lot about color by doing these gray tests. So come with me on the adventure of painting in full color. If you're a new painter, this is a great way to get started with full color by just using 3 colors. And if you're an experienced painter, painting with triads lets you get to know each one of your color pigments individually and how it combines with other pigments. So it's good for all ages and also all mediums. I use gouache and watercolor and casein, but it also applies to if you paint in oil or acrylic. So come with me. In the description below this video is a link to the Gumroad video so you can download your copy. There's also a Facebook group called Color and Practice where people are sharing their experiments both in the field and in the studio based on these tutorials. Okay, thanks for watching. You might want to check out my website or subscribe to my channel. And then here's a playlist with more good stuff and a video that continues the story. So check them out and share with your friends.